Hey,
All right. Live.
Live. All right.
Cool.
Cool. Who wants to start?
Document.
All right. Should we just go through the
Document,
agenda?
right?
First thing up is Android 4.0 release update. I think maybe this was written before we got pretty organized as of yesterday.
Yeah, not everybody's reading the dev list though, so just a 30
There's
seconds.
a release
Yeah,
candidate.
the whitelist stuff is the last thing to solve, or the order.
There's certainly some bumps to this or some trickiness in that Cordova Android 4.0. Depends on a whitelist plugin, which is only available via NPM, which we will be including in the new default project template, which will be which then a new version of CLI. So I think we're somewhat hoping to just release all these things all at once, and then some people will get messed up, and we'll have to help them. Maybe not the greatest strategy, but we only have so much.
The whitelist is applicable to iOS, but it's iOS 4, right? Not the one we have right now.
Is iOS going out to 4 as well?
iOS 4 is not going to be ready, I don't think,
No.
by the next CLI release. We're not waiting for it.
But the whitelist is applicable. I think I saw something about
The
that
whitelist
whitelist.
plugin is applicable for both, right?
Oh yeah, that's right.
Does it depend on iOS 4 though? It applies to iOS, but is it?
Let me double check, because I think I saw something in that plugin about iOS, but maybe it doesn't have the platform yet. But I know the config.xml has like intent stuff, like stuff for the whitelist, but I'm guessing that it's just ignored.
Yeah, so I know Ian added this pluginable whitelist functionality to both iOS and Android, and he kind of left them on a branch for a very long time. We merged it into Android in time for, well, we made it into 4.0 for Android, and then he merged it into iOS only recently into the 4.0x branch as well. And I think in the plugins, we commented out the iOS support for them so that you wouldn't hit the engine tag saying this only works on an unreleased version of iOS, and then you wouldn't get compile errors because it actually does depend on an unreleased version of iOS. So I think the current state of the whitelist plugins is that they're just Android only.
Yeah, let me see where I am. So what I'm saying is there's something in the config.xml about whitelist for iOS, and people may be just confused seeing that there when it's not actually being used.
Yeah, it shouldn't be in any release version, I don't think. It's not entry point 8.
It's in the app Hello World, and the new one that we're going to release.
But not in any previous release, so upcoming release, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like when we put this out, people would install this new Hello World, and it will have config.xml for the whitelist. That is confusing. We just wait for the question. That's it.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Yeah, in the app Hello World's default config, there is a platform tag that says platform iOS. If you're on iOS, then allow
IGMS.
Because I was confused. I went digging down the repos and I figured it out. Like, it's not used. Don't worry about it. But maybe it's just me.
So maybe it'd be worth having a comment there saying only relevant to iOS 4.0 or something.
Yeah.
I think there's something in there. Let me check.
Right here.
No, there's nothing.
We could just hurry and get iOS 4.0 out.
What was our solution to the whitelist plugins not working on lower versions of Android? I remember we talked about rolling back the Cordova app Hello World to not use the one with the whitelist. But then recently I saw that we wanted to include the Cordova app Hello World that did have the whitelist plugins. They're both released. What was our solution there? I don't remember exactly. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So this is specifically if you get the latest tooling but want to use an older Android version, not the one that's not the new.
Are we still supporting that?
it's to be clear first that this is not going to be default for anyone, but we do support explicitly installing an older sort of Android tooling. And that's the address. I don't know that was resolved. Maybe we discussed options. We just have engine dependencies in the plugin, right?
Yeah, I'm checking.
There was discussion about releasing the tooling before Android 4, and that one older version of Hello World without the whitelist. But since we are releasing the new tooling including the Android 4, we can include the whitelist. But then if somebody wants to downgrade to the previous version of Android, he will need to remove the whitelist from the template.
Yeah. I think this really.
There's an engine tag. There's an engine tag that says this plugin only works or is turned on only on version higher and equal for all --dev.
Yeah, you get a plugin won't fail to install.
I feel like we'd only run into this issue if somebody wanted to create a brand new Cordova project, so they're using the new app Hello World, but then they explicitly try to use an older version of Android with it.
Right.
Yeah, and the workaround is just don't add that plugin.
Yeah, just don't add that plugin. So if you already have an existing Cordova project and you upgrade your tools, and you don't upgrade your Android, you don't need to install that plugin. You won't run into any issues.
But because of plugin auto restore and it being an app Hello World, if we add the engine tag, they'll get a warning, and then they'll have to modify their config XML to just remove the dependency.
Yeah, I believe Cordova Prepare will try to do an auto restore, and that'll fail, I guess.
So maybe the real thing is just to make sure the engine tag is in the plugin and then document, not in the mainline docs, but just like a fact or something. Or maybe we just wait until somebody asks.
It's in the engine already, in the whitelist.
Yeah. Someone should post this
that's what I was
and respond to it. That'll be documentation.
It's going to be bumpy. I think we'll have a lot of people filing the same bugs over and again.
So
that's okay. We release fast, right?
From now, we'll be in a better spot.
Yeah. Once we have RC of the CLI with the 4.0 Android released, but not installed by default, then we should probably reach out and get feedback from people who actually try going through the docs, the upgrade, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Once we have before we blog about it.
Yeah, we're pretty much releasing everything.
And we don't want to blog, even if we do, make our official 4.0 Android snapshot, we don't want to blog about it until the tools go out, because the 4.0 snapshot does rely on this whitelist plugin. Well,
Which
I guess
you can download without the new tools.
You can still download it if you just use the get URL instead of the npm name. So maybe that would be what we blog about.
Okay. Anyway, so it's underway. Moving on.
Good summary.
Hey, I have a quick piggyback question. That's probably, well, silly is not the right word, but I'll just ask it. The crosswalk plugin. What's going to happen is the engine going to prevent that from being installed in older versions of Cordova?
Yes.
I mean, okay. There, done. It's just since it's featured, there's a lot of people that have existing projects, and I'm sure they're going to be excited about switching to the plugin. And so, I just wondered if there would be a lot of support issues about that. But I guess if they can't add it, then it's a non-issue.
Yeah, I think we need to reread the blog post or make a whole other guide about whatever Android 4.0. Spell it out really clear, like how people try it. Because I think I agree. Like we say, hey, crosswalk is supported. This is the name of the plugin. But what are your steps if you?
Yeah, I just mean there's a lot of users I think that are Cordova users because they want to get crosswalk. Because there's a lot of activity with people, that are making games and stuff, and they're not very heavy Cordova users necessarily. It's a good way for them to get crosswalk. So there might need to be a little bit more guidance.
Right.
So it sounds like that's what you're already asking. Thank you.
Next up, ApacheCon. Mark and I will be there. I know.
I'll be going.
Yeah, I think we've said enough on the lists. This is sort of maybe.
Yeah. Anise and Brian will be there
Oh, yeah?
from our team. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. Is there a group where we can talk, or are we going to meet up over there? I'm just trying to figure out.
Ross was talking about doing a special breakout of Cordova. So I don't remember the details, but there is something where it was just going to be Cordova related.
Okay, sounds good.
There was also talk about
Is that the birds of feather thing? I think that's on the schedule.
Yeah, birds of feather thing.
Yeah.
I think Brian usually wears a hat, so you might recognize him. We can kind of further coordinate. We did this last year. We had a spreadsheet of contact information which we just sent on the mailing list. We could do that again. But the conference isn't that big. I feel like we should be able to find each other.
Yeah, we should be able to find each other. All right. Okay.
There's an app for that.
I'll wear a Cordova shirt.
All right. Moving on.
Yep.
Plugin and platform save and restore. I have it marked down as just like final words. I know it came up again recently. I thought we had resolved everything. I don't remember what's left on the table, but it was.
I think with Tim's last PR, everything's done. It's feature complete. We're using the spec attribute, and the one last thing, I think there's one last bug Tim mentioned. Tim works from Australia. He's from Microsoft as well. So he can't join for this Hangout, but there's one last bug he's aware of, but I think we can release without that. It's not an important bug.
Awesome. Okay. So moving plugins to NPM phase 1 final update. I think
everything just needs to get released now. I started a discuss thread last night. The only question I really have is, do we have to vote twice now with the old ID branch? I'm trying to cherry pick. I'm trying to actually merge all the commits from master into old ID branches, but just reverting the ones that change the IDs. This is definitely going to get a little crazy if we start going different versioning schemes, which I think we're going to do. But it's just something we're going to have to kind of keep an eye on and manage. We probably don't have to release to CPR every time either. If I don't know, we could justify it. But it's just a matter of releasing it now. I think I've done everything and testing like crazy
so
on every platform.
Core plugins are in NPM, but the tooling, like to actually fetch from NPM if you use the new naming scheme, that's in master but hasn't released. So as soon as we
the tooling hasn't released, but there's also a big change for all the plugins that are about to get released. So I've just bumped them all, gave them all a major version bump. They all have paramedic support now. They're actually using the package name as package ID. So no more. So you won't find any references to org.apache.cordova. Device in the device plugin, except in the Java packages. But that's fine.
But then, what was the decision with pure dependencies? Do we put pure dependencies in their package JSON?
So I did move pure dependencies to package JSON, but we're not using it at all. We're still completely reliant on plugin XML's dependency tag.
Right.
So they're in the package JSON, but we're not installing plugins using npm install. So they won't pop up at all for now.
I think that's a good choice.
Yeah, I think we may end up not using pure dependencies. Just looking at, I know this is going to come up a little later on in the package JSON CLI workflow, but NativeScript seems to be using their own dependency management system to handle it, and pure dependencies aren't perfect for our use case, and it may be better for us to do our own custom dependency management as well.
Yeah, I also want to dig into that. a little bit later when we get into that.
Yeah, it's a later discussion, and I think we need to still hash it out a bit, build some prototypes, that kind of stuff.
Hey, before we move on, Steve, you mentioned about splitting the version identifiers or not revving the old ones. Yeah, I saw that on the mailing list, but I didn't really track what your motivation was for separating the versions.
Yeah, so it is going to be adding complexity, so I'm not sure if it's the right way to go, which is why I would like to have some feedback on it. But the reason why we're doing the big version jump in the first place is because we're changing the actual package, the plugin ID. So it's, the plugin ID has now become Cordova-plugin-device. So with the old plugin IDs, the ones the old branch, the old ID branch, the ID hasn't actually been changed there, and we can't change it there because we need it to be reverse domain name style to publish on CPR. So if we have some big changes to a plugin that we still want to publish CPR because IDEs are still using CPR plugins, and maybe people who haven't updated their tools are still using CPR. We essentially just still need to publish it. So we could have the same version, but the change actually hasn't been in that plugin to warrant that version change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I kind of got that, and I wondered if that was the only reason. And to me at least, it just didn't seem like it was worth introducing maintenance complexity for the sake of, respecting the semantic versioning, exactly.
Yeah, and I do think it does add complexity, and I'm honestly not sure that it is worth it. So if more people feel that way, I can easily bump the versions for all of the old ID branches.
I don't think there needs to be any kind of. I think it's fine one way or the other. Since they have different names, they're, as far as all the tools are concerned, completely unrelated plugins. So whether they have different versions, same versions, whether we bump them at all, it doesn't even matter because they're different.
Well, I thought there was one. The one thing I thought was worth keeping them in sync for was just for bug tracking. If there's bugs that are introduced, they'll probably be introduced into both versions with both IDs. Since Steve's going to keep, I think, isn't he going to be merging changes back into the old name version ones?
Yeah.
So then if you look at Jira, then you're going to have to say it's in this version and in this version, depending on whether you're using CPR or using NPM.
I guess I'm skeptical that we'll be able to do this perfectly, but I mean, is published to both names under two different branches, and I don't intend to verify the contents of 10 plugins times 2 names to make sure that every rename happened correctly. So I think we're going to get bugs that happen only on the CPR version at this version, and only on the NPM version at this version. So I think any bugs need to have the name and the ID anyway.
And it is a pretty short window. Like, once we decide to make CPR read-only, you won't need to maintain the old ID branch anymore, I wouldn't imagine.
Do we have any numbers? How many people use stale CLI versions for how long?
I don't think we really should add some analytics.
We can't really do that because we have so many tools using our CLI. We have no way of telling if it's a tool.
We do have CPR download numbers, right? Could we use that to say, I
think the client name is in the download.
Yeah, there is I think an ID in the download metrics on the CPR.
Yeah, there are.
So we could look at the last month's worth of numbers a month from now, but somebody would have to write a script.
Yep.
A HTTP somewhere. Okay, well, potentially, if we want that answered, we could look into it.
Yeah.
There's also like a trivial prompt for update script type thing that you can have as like a node package, like Bower and a bunch of these tools use right now, which it'll just look at on NPM to say what's the latest version, and if you're not on latest, it will prompt you to update to get people to stay on tip more often. But it is made more difficult by downstreams using CLI directly.
We could throw in CLI. Like not in Cordova Lit, but in Cordova CLI.
Even CLI is used for CLI parsing. But we could try to see if like the binary name is CLI. Anyway, I'll throw up a discuss separate here.
Yeah. Also on the subject of the IDs of the plugins, we're getting all kinds of pull requests where people are trying to change the ID back.
Yeah.
So I think we have to do a better job of defining the docs for use in both cases, or something along those lines, because everyone looks at the docs on master. So if they don't see the right ID, they're going to want to change it back. Which there's pull requests for that already.
That's because they can't.
Like add a note about legacy in the latest master.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good
Yeah,
call.
that'd be good.
Maybe our note should just be, if this doesn't work for you, update your tools rather than download the old plugin.
Yeah, put something but in master, but everybody reads master.
All right. Well, there's quite a bit left. All right, that was it for the simple conversations. So the next up is medic, paramedic, and mobile spec. I don't know, Microsoft guys, I guess if you wouldn't mind running this. I don't know.
Yeah, so I can give a quick walkthrough of the ci.cordova.io that we've set up. Have you guys played around with it? Anyone?
I have.
Okay.
It's awesome. I fixed some bugs in Android's file plugin because I noticed they were failing there.
Nice.
Okay, cool. So yeah, let me just give you a quick overview. I'll try to do a screen share.
By the way, hi guys, I'm Dimitri. Sorry, I missed the 10 a.m. I forgot. I didn't check what time it was today, sorry.
Yeah,
We didn't really do introductions anyway.
Dimitri is actually one of the main guys who's been working on this from Microsoft.
I'm supposed to be in that room with those guys, but I'm calling them from home.
Do you have a Christmas tree?
Sorry?
Do you have a Christmas tree?
You don't have a question?
Oh, no. Oh, sweet. Christmas tree. Nice.
All right,
Now we have
so
some Pink Floyd posters.
yeah. So is my screen being shared?
Yeah, we can see it.
All right, cool.
Can you click on it for anybody who...
Yeah, so we've got builders for Android OS X, Android Windows, BlackBerry. Currently, it's we don't have any BlackBerry devices or don't have any know-how about BlackBerry emulators. We have the builders, but someone probably from the community probably wants to pick it up and get it running. iOS and Windows and Windows Phone 8. So what it's basically doing, in short, is creating a mobile spec application, running it on an emulator on an emulator and reporting results. As you can see, tests are failing, and we're reporting results over here. We're planning to improve this a little bit. I think one of the ideas we had was instead of just saying running tests, we can actually report summary of how many tests are failing over here. So people get a quick glance view of what's failing at what point. Yeah, this is working now. It's been a little bit challenging to get it working or keep it up to working state for a bit. The main challenges are generally with emulator launching, or mobile spec keeps getting broken because of the changes in master. So that's been the biggest challenge.
So also right now we kind of watch the builds manually. So one of the things I wanted to discuss was getting notifications up to the mailing list. So what did you guys think in terms of notifications? What's the best idea? We're thinking just sending a mail to the mailing list. Like right now when machines go down, similar thing, for example, when a build fails, every time a build fails, drop a notification, but we're worried it might be a little too much noise.
Yeah, at the moment it looks like it would email for every build.
Correct, yeah. So we're thinking to do a state change. So whenever it goes from passing to failing, the issue for that is we first need to get it from failing to passing on all tests. So that's kind of a big initial hurdle we need to get over to get everything green before we start noticing, it going from green to red.
We maintained BuildBot for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
About a year ago, and we found the same thing. It was like after a while, I didn't even read any of the emails because the flakiness of it was a maintenance burden. So on the other hand, like an email filter is trivial to create. We created another mailing list just for it if we wanted to keep it out of our mail archives. I think maybe that would be the best thing, but just trying to make it green, I think, is step one, and that could take longer than you might think.
Well, in terms of state changes, I don't know how difficult it would be to implement, but if we could detect new failing tests, somehow eliminating the ones that are flaky, so it doesn't necessarily have to go from entirely green to red, it could be more red, but I don't know if that's expectable. And then if that's true, then you could get a list of patches since the build started and email those people that were potentially responsible.
Or even if it just did one email a day with a summary of the state of all the builders.
Yeah, that was the other option to actually integrate this with the nightly build, the idea that Steve had. And we actually do a nightly build, do a nightly version, publish on an NPM, run the test on that version of the code, and publish results of the test.
I think that would be useful.
Yeah.
What about integrating back with GitHub so that we can see the results of a pull request on the pull request?
So that's also already in the works. I've created an info ticket. So I've been talking with the info guys. This is definitely technically possible. We just need to ask them to do it for us. So they need to sign up to receive the pull request notifications from GitHub for our repositories, and then from there it just kind of works. So once
they need to enable the webhook, and we implement the webhook.
I think they need to. So I think we can just enable it. I don't know who enables it. Either we can do it or they can do it.
They're the ones that can enable enable that in the GitHub account.
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry. I was thinking about our own forks. Yeah, correct.
So commit hooks are already there. Just that they're not listening to our repository. They're listening to some other repositories for now. If you can see, there's already, like, if you see my screen, there's a commit coming in, and this is unrelated, and this BuildBot server is shared by a lot of projects, a lot of Apache projects. But I think commit hooks is sort of simpler, but pull request might be one step away, and
so the commit hooks for our repositories aren't coming. That's the issue. For our like PR or commit hook is basically 2 check marks as opposed to 1 on the hook.
Yep.
So it's really easy to set up. We just need to get them to set it up. So I can give a link. Should we load up that info ticket?
So the hooks and the running sound relatively easy. I mean, you have to do it. But then where do you report?
So
separate waterfall for all PRs?
The report right in GitHub. In the pull request.
I see. So it wouldn't be on the one time.
Yeah.
But
my opinion here too is, like, from trying to run this machine for a while, is that this is maybe thinking too far ahead. Like, we just need to get the build green and to stay green for like a full day before we should care about pull request integration.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I do agree. I mean, we need to take baby steps, and the first thing is we should wean out the failing tests. Either they're failing because of an environment issue, or they just never passed in the first place. It's not clear to me, or some of them. So we've been trying to do that same exercise with Windows Phone and Windows platform, and we found a few bugs, in fact, in the platform itself. The tests were failing, and actually it was indicative of bugs. So it was a valuable exercise to look at the tests and why they were failing.
That's awesome. Yeah, the file bug recently, too, was a real bug. On Android, I think the failing ones right now are sensor-based. And
I see.
you just ignore those if running in an emulator. And even on my Nexus 7, they fail because my Nexus 7 accelerometer doesn't pass the quality threshold that our native code does not let you.
Oh, I see.
So,
yeah, accelerometer has been the one which has been almost failing for most platforms. So we could maybe mark those as pending because they're not really passing.
Yeah, just to get this to a clean state, I think we have this ability to mark them as yellow now, as skipped.
Yep.
So that was the other thing, yeah, for tests that are flaky. So when you were mentioning, some tests pass or fail all the time, what we want to really see is new failures. For tests that are flaky, we could just mark them as pending. Ideally, it'd be good if we had like yet another state that says, these are tests that are flaky. We declare them to be flaky, because even flaky tests eventually will want to fix them.
Yep.
Or delete them.
I think it's good to mark them as pending because these tests have been flaky for over 2 years. So I don't think it's really on the verge of being fixed.
Then is there a value in even keeping those tests around? Should we just delete them?
Well, if we're going to go through and mark them as pending, we might as well evaluate each and every one of them and decide if it's an issue with documentation, an issue with implementation, or the test itself is not valid.
Yeah.
Because I've been through that, and a lot of times it's really hard to tell what the test is even testing for because it looks like it was written quickly and there's no comments at all. So it's not like it references a particular spec or there's some way that we can go, this test is testing this feature.
Yeah, that's actually another pain point we have with the tests. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Please.
No, that's fine.
Can you finish?
Yeah, I mean, right now we have to basically read and figure out what it looks like it's trying to test.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was going to mention we have some issues with some of our test code quality. So sometimes I guess tests have been neglected for a while. They weren't run for a while. So a lot of them just need overall cleanup, even just the test code cleanup. We've had the app crash because tests were calling down twice. So things like that. Yeah.
So I think the next call for action is to fix these for Android and iOS. I think for Windows and Windows Phone, I think we're pretty close to getting green on all tests.
Nice.
Yep.
It's awesome.
Yeah, you guys are always.
Well, that's the 12 Microsoft people on the project now.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that covers that.
Jesse, do you want to talk about Paramedic and what's going on?
There is some overlap in what Paramedic does. Paramedic was intended to be a quick way to see if a pull request had an issue, and it essentially just uses open source CIs, so Travis and AppVeyor. Unfortunately, there's no way for me to use Travis and run a test for a plugin against more than one platform, which is the issue I've run up against. So right now, all of the core plugins are running tests for every commit and every pull request, but they're running it on an iOS emulator at Travis CI. So it's not covering the full device list that we should be, but it is a starting point, so we can at least see if something is breaking on iOS, which is possibly our most used device. So I figured that was okay as a starting point. Paramedic is also somewhat useful as a command line utility, so you can actually just run it from the command line and test a particular device and a list of plugins. So it's good that way, and actually Shaz has been doing some tests with it. So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, for Cordova iOS 4.0, there's some fundamental changes in headers and stuff. So I've been downloading the list of iOS plugins from the plugin registry. So I've been using Paramedic to test like 460 iOS plugins to see if they build. So that's what I've been using Paramedic for.
Yeah, in Shaz's case, he just wanted to know if the project would build if he added the plugin.
Yep.
So I added another parameter which just essentially doesn't run any tests. It essentially just tests and sees if it builds. If it builds, it reports that it's okay. But the way that Paramedic typically works is it runs the tests that it expects to be in the tests folder inside each plugin. And so it's doing the same things that Mobile Spec does that BuildBot is doing. Same tests, just it's running them in isolation, which is somewhat nice as well.
So, one thing I wanted to mention is that Mobile Spec now supports having specifying which plugins it's testing at a time. So there's a bit of overlap between Mobile Spec's functionality and Paramedic's functionality.
Jesse, are you using?
Should we maintain both? Sorry.
There is still a bit of use for both because Paramedic is really about the automated tests only, none of the manual tests. So
okay, gotcha.
It basically just uses the medic.json to report its own results back to the command line. So it spawns its own little server and waits for results so that we can actually see them on the command line. So I think there is use in having both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Also, what's the history on those manual tests? Does anyone actually run them every release, or what's the state of them?
I run them if
I release, but I do use them when I'm making changes to a plugin or when I'm doing a pull request that tests features that are not covered by automated tests.
Okay, so people find them valuable.
Yeah, it depends probably on the front end.
In the future, does it make sense to keep them around, or can we replace them with automation?
Like, for example, there's like benchmarks for the bridge, and you can switch all the different bridge modes, and there's a bunch of buttons. And you can, so a lot of them do have value, I think. But I think the actual quality varies widely based on how often they're used and how often they're updated.
Is it something that we can automate?
Whatever could have been automated is likely an auto test. Maybe that's not necessarily true. Probably for some of them we could. But
I think there's a lot of utility in actually building a Hello World app that uses a feature of a plugin, and that's kind of what the manual tests are meant to do.
Okay.
To do with camera, I want to make sure when I take a picture, it shows in the image tag. Right. I can see the picture when it's done.
I see.
But I don't think it's realistic that we run them on any kind of frequency. But it saves you from building from scratch a demo application every time you work on a plugin.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense.
A little bit of social engineering might get it to be used more often. Based on what Andrew just said, it could also be used as a showcase for plugins and demo. If every plugin had a manual test which just went over all of its features, it could be used as a way to explore what's available. People have done this downstream. I've seen apps in the store that just show off a bunch of Cordova features.
So potentially then, one kind of thing I was wondering about is the plugins, or the plugin tests, they are very tightly coupled to both manual and automated. Since these aren't really run particularly all the time during testing, does it make, could we split that off and just something else, like a separate file, so we have your regular automated tests and then manual tests are in a separate file that automation doesn't even touch? Because automation right now loads up and parses all that code all the time, and it is a little tricky. For example, if you don't write tests that conform to the plugin test framework paradigm, have your manual tests always and your automated tests always, and put them in two separate functions, you can't have tests. Does it make sense to simplify that and just split them off? Because they seem like two very separate concerns. Because the manual tests, they're not really, they're I guess manual exercise or kind of a demo of the plugin, but they're not something that automation really ever needs to care about. But right now it cares about very heavily every single time. Yeah,
I looked at that a little bit too, because I only ever load the auto tests. we could simply just have an auto test file and a manual test file.
So
I think,
yes,
the plugin test framework, like the way it looks and the way it looks things up, and it just checks to see if there exists like a spec. So you can already do this. Like you could split it up into 2 files. I mean, I guess it will load it if one exists, but.
Gotcha.
But you're certainly free to make changes there. Like the design of test framework was sort of like the first one that we put together. So there's certainly lots of room to grow.
Yeah, I mean, you can use a test folder and a manual test folder.
Yeah.
Mobile spec.
So on that same vein, what is are we directly married to plugin test framework, or can we rely solely on mobile spec?
We used to only have mobile spec, and it used to have all of the tests in it.
Mm-hmm.
Michael wrote test framework in an effort to make the tests live in the same GitHub or Git repo as the actual plugin code, so that when you make a change, you wouldn't have to commit to 2 separate repos at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I think we're open to any design which just keeps the tests in the same Git repo as the code is tested. Beyond that, I think.
Yeah, the second goal, although I don't know how important it is, was that the mobile spec app was just supposed to be one of many test apps. Like I was going to ask Jesse if Paramedic actually uses the test framework.
Yeah, it does.
But it doesn't use the mobile spec app. So it's essentially an alternative app for the test framework. And this is cool, right? Like this is by design. We wanted. For a while, for Chrome apps, we had our own app as well, but we're trying to move towards using mobile spec directly.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so if you have an idea for a better mobile spec, that's by design. Build one, and maybe it will replace mobile spec.
Okay.
And test framework could certainly evolve.
Gotcha. All right. Here's for that.
Those are very nice, I guess.
And if you could make Jasmine smarter so that it doesn't matter if you hit done twice, the call done twice.
Yeah.
I think 2.2 does it a little bit better, thankfully.
Yeah, maybe we should just update Jasmine.
We did. Someone did.
Yeah.
Someone did update it to 2.2, so that's good.
Awesome.
All right, cool. So,
Next. So I quickly added, before we spend the rest of our time talking about package.json, I just added a quick, should we talk about GitHub issues and Wiki? For anybody who hasn't read the mailing list within the last day or so, there was the question of, can we use GitHub issues? Is that allowed? And we seem to, I don't know that it's definitive, but we have somewhat of an answer to say that it's up to us. There's more concern about risks. You could do that.
I like the idea just because it would be really easy for people to just file an issue. I feel like there is a barrier for people to go to issues.cordova.io, create an account, file it. If they want to assign themselves an issue, they have to get us to give them the ability to do that.
Issues will be all over the place, and we'll never be able to keep track of them if we put issues in every single repo.
Yeah, we have over 50 repos right now.
Yeah, that is true.
So I have a problem on Android using the CLI with the device plugin. Where do I file that issue? Does it go to the device? Does it go to the platform? Or does it go to the tooling?
Well, GitHub does allow you to reference other projects and then go cross post, but I don't know whether it'll be in the issues list.
Yeah, but you can't expect the user to
Yeah,
go
user wouldn't know.
all that out, right?
Right.
Also, alternatively, we can disable issue trackers on a per repo basis. So for the longest time in mobile Chrome apps, we disabled the issue tracker and everything except for the main entry point Git. So then you really only had one spot for all of them, and we just use tags for things that, it's not a big. At that point, I think it's pretty much the same as Jira, except you don't have to create a Jira account.
I remember, I think it was Carlos who suggested the idea of have the issues actually go and get created on Jira as well, using hooks or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I That seems like twice as many issues.
Yeah, well, maybe it was a dumb idea, but I don't know. I don't know what are the requirements that we have to meet to have GitHub issues be available to the community, right? And it's not the tracking of the issues, also the conversation and cross-linking and with other GitHub projects that are doing similar things with us. And just the idea of Spark out of the recent conversations happening in GitHub around creating kind of web/native plugins for NativeScript and React Native, and I felt sad that we didn't have a GitHub issue for Cordova. So I think I opened the doors to hell, I guess, with that email.
So if we just turned on issue tracking but didn't announce that we're moving, didn't change any of our process, then perhaps issues that would have gone unfiled previously start becoming filed. So maybe we actively close issues on GitHub and copy the data onto Jira and convince people to switch over the conversation to Jira. But
I think that's what the community doesn't like, right? They just like to use GitHub and use that webpage to put comments. So I think it's just a matter of asking, like, what is the, if somebody shows us like the terms and a 200-page legal document, then ask like, what is actually the requirement? What is not technical possible, right? Is it data that you want to back up? Is it data that you don't want to be public? Is it authorship? But I was confused because we already have our source code, which is related to IP in Git. So maybe I got it wrong.
I think that was answered, and I think we have free choice to use any issue tracker we want. And then we just take the risk on by not using Jira to say if the GitHub issue tracker goes down, then we're going to pay the price.
Maybe let's save the is it following the Apache way conversation for the email list, because I think that's something we need to make sure is written down anyway. Let's just talk about, if we could do it, what would we want it to look like right now? And so a little bit, I think we kind of do use GitHub already for issues and for a wiki.
Yeah.
And by that I mean every pull request, I generally comment on the pull request rather than commenting on the associated Jira, and that's kind of where the conversation happens. And for our wiki, I just was editing it again this week, and it still takes like 30 seconds to save a page, and sometimes it times out. And so we moved a lot of our more important docs over to Coho/docs, markdown files, and I feel like that's been working really well. And that's basically all a GitHub wiki is, anyway. So
it was already maybe it's not the wiki, but there might be information useful there for committers and contributors, and we always pointing out. We always need to wait for that email saying, hey, how do I do this? And we send out an email, hey, go to the wiki, like, go where? And then send the link, and then instead of it being in the front page, right, it's just a GitHub and easy to find like any other wiki. But it could be also part of the web page, right? Why not part of the Cordova.io? Maybe that's useful information in there.
Yeah. Well, my suggestion was to make it part of Docs, the Docs repo, and just have more READMEs for all those wiki-related things, and they could just be published as part of the publishing of the Docs site.
That's a good idea. Have a tab or something.
You know what? The Docs site is so painful to publish that it gets published like a few times a year.
Yeah, I did notice our docs are quite outdated from the ones which are in the repo.
What is it that makes it difficult to publish?
Mainly that it's still using Ruby.
Oh, serious? I thought somebody made them JavaScript only.
Yeah, somebody was working on that.
No, you're right. The docs now use just JavaScript, but then we host the docs on our website, and our website you'll still use Ruby.
So we're thinking like potentially these are automatically generated docs, or kind of a mix of both.
You run a script, generate the HTML, and then push it, right?
You can make it part of the nightly process. So,
yeah, we can. So this is something we could definitely put into the build bot.
I just think it works better to use GitHub for it, because then as soon as you make the change, it's already published.
oh, I see.
Manual step to publish is really annoying.
Yeah, it's definitely easier to. Wiki should be easy to edit for anybody, and it's definitely easier to edit on GitHub.
Well, I haven't looked at how the GitHub Wiki works, but do you get access to raw files or not? Is it the same as having a directory structure with content files? Because if it's not, I might affect how we do our automated conversions.
Yeah, be careful because there's GitHub pages and there's also GitHub Wiki, right? There's a distinction.
Well, I don't know how wikis are implemented, but I know that we've used, Markdown Viewer, but we would have to do some investigation because we do have a copy of all of our docs in different languages, some of which is done automatically through.
Yeah, we have that problem already now that we've moved our docs to plugins, though.
Yeah, I think that the wiki is more a purpose of like how to get started to contribute to Cordova, right? That's kind of the net of it, and maybe some design documents that we have around the CLI or the contract between the platforms and the CLI and the plugins, or the specs that we never write, I guess.
I mean, we do write some specs. They get lost in individual Google Docs, and it's really hard. Oftentimes, I'm trying to search the mailing list. Oh, where was the spec about the NPM, whatever, and other things. Maybe we should find a common place.
I can send a few links to how other projects are doing it, using it. I think that's one I saw was Bower. Also, I think Angular. We put the meeting minutes in there. They changed the spec. They have a design doc. They have like how to set up your computer to contribute to the project. And those type of things, right? To get more people to help out.
I think it's, for the record, I think it's perfectly fine that specs or design docs get lost in email, because a month later they're out of date and spreading misinformation anyway. So any kind of feature that needs documenting, I think it's important to do a spec, but then copy and paste that spec maybe to start into actual docs that live beside the code where it's relevant to.
Yeah, there's just some things that are on the wiki that, like the contributors contributors workflow doc and a few other docs, they're just not anywhere else except for the wiki. And I noticed that I was actually amazed when I saw that you had made some changes to the wiki so quickly, because I always have to wait so long to make any edits just to log in. And I saw that you had been making some changes to Markdown, and I knew that like the versioning rules are in those Markdown files, but I think there's a little bit of a discovery challenge with those that you don't have with the wiki. And maybe there's an SEO problem that could address it, even if it was on GitHub. I don't know, but maybe there could be an index file that gets added that could help to organize some of the Markdown files, and then maybe that could be in GitHub pages so that it could get into search engines and people could discover it. It's just, if it's only in repos, then it's good for like the people that are on the mailing list and the active users, but it's not so good for people who are just trying to find out and learn, getting entry into starting to get involved with the project.
I think maybe best choice is if we could figure out how to turn on GitHub Wiki. Maybe second best choice is we can move our docs into GitHub pages so that they have yet another view that's even nicer to view them. And I think the contributor workflow is the kind of last useful piece of information on the wiki that hasn't been moved to Markdown files. So if anyone wanted to take that on, I think that's been mostly Josh that's been doing that.
I think I agree with you. The contributor workflow is the big thing that I was thinking of. There is a couple other documents that are way out of date, but they're still of interest. I know, a year and a half ago, I was reading some of the docs on the wiki that just provide some context to people. I mean, frankly, I don't have a lot of experience with open source projects and contributing to open source projects, and I know there's other people on my team that have a hard time understanding how Cordova relates to PhoneGap and how Cordova relates to, say, Worklite, and there's some docs on the wiki that talk about the relationship between Cordova as an upstream and some of the downstream distributions. And even though they're out of date, they still provide some good context, and I see them as having value. yeah, I mean, you're right about spec docs and how they quickly get stale and become useless. But some of those sort of context documents that are on the wiki, I think they still have value, even if they're somewhat out of date, just because they help people to, get an understanding.
So maybe an FAQ, because some of those docs are old, and maybe the actual answer isn't that long. So like a go-to FAQ document would be important to keep.
Yeah, and also I like Andrew's idea about the design docs or any documentation about the code be next to the code. So if there's stuff in there that it's out of date, which I think some of the stuff for design docs are respect, just let them delete them or migrate them to the code that has the repo, either the Cordova lib or Cordova CLI. But the rest of the stuff, like the contributor workflow and kind of the other questions, that might stick in the wiki, right?
Though there is some value to having it in one integrated place rather than 50 different repos to find my docs for how to build a Cordova app.
It varies on what you're documenting. It really does.
Well, also, don't we have a read the docs as well, aside from the wiki? That also details a lot of this information. That's kind of, I guess, still not completely decoupled from PhoneGap. Like read the docs Sphinx. It seemed like there's yet another place where a doc live, or maybe this is just something out of date and we're not aware of.
Sorry, can you say that again? What's the other?
I think it's a read the docs installation. Like, or I'm going to paste a link to this guy. Apache org docs, or is this?
It's the CLI guide. Yeah, that's a part of the Cordova-docs.
Gotcha. Okay, I see. Thanks.
It's been copied into the website and then.
Yeah. So like something is hosting this as well. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's
also Apache
for guides and like cross-cutting thing. That is the right spot for.
So I think we have some. Do we have some crossover between the wiki and this guy? In terms of content that lives in both places.
I think this is the thing that we were talking about earlier. That Andrew was saying is hard to publish, right?
Okay, so that I see. Gotcha.
Is that right?
We're gonna have to do a docs release with the tools release this time around.
Yep.
For sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's hard to release because of the fact that we do a multitude of versions and languages at the same time. So it's just a big job. But I think we should try and make that process quicker so that we can just commit stuff to the docs repo and have it live and as part of our release process.
So versioning probably gets easier because you just have history, right? And we could just branch docs just like we do with releases. I mean, it might be harder if the repo, like the docs repo, doesn't align so well to all of our different other repos and versions. But at the very least, you can use by date search or something. But we will definitely need to look into translation and to make sure that doesn't get more difficult. It's right now just cloning the repo and translating it and back to translated English.
It's interesting that the front page of our Cordova wiki tells it not to use it. Tells people not to use it.
Yeah, I just added that yesterday. I said, please put stuff in Coho. I was curious how long it would take anyone to find it, but this is kind of formation.
Yeah, so the Coho link right now is actually broken, which is unfortunate.
And we would need it, but we can't use the wiki.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we're starting to. Yeah. This is interesting stuff, but there's a new discuss thread. Let's sleep on it for a couple days.
Yeah.
So we started talking about GitHub issues and wiki, and I kind of agree that maybe documentation is a clearer win than issues.
Would there be even any opposition from? So mainly we've gotten opposition for using GitHub from ASF, but for keeping code there, there shouldn't be any opposition for keeping our documentation wherever we want, right?
We can keep our documentation anywhere. We can mirror our code anywhere as long as it comes from Apache servers.
Yeah. Same with the wiki. Is there a requirement that we should be on ASF's wikis?
Nope.
We
just put wherever we want.
So yeah,
not on our own site.
That shouldn't have any issues at all. I guess for issue tracking, I don't know if the same arguments that Ross had against using GitHub for code apply to issue tracking because there's nothing to do with logs.
At least Jim said that they don't apply.
Yeah, Jim resolved it.
Yeah. Okay. So.
I mean, Jim is just the one.
For GitHub Wiki, we need to open an infra, right, for them to enable it, and then decide which repo to use.
The infra that we should open is that we want to be able to control our own mirrors on GitHub. So
yes,
we should,
that's a better one.
Be able to change hooks, do whatever we want.
Pull in pull requests.
Yep.
Well, maybe not that because it's no longer a mirror.
And that's fine.
Can't fit this mirror.
There's no such thing as a two-way mirror. It's called a window.
Exception. All right. Well, there's a discuss thread for it. Let's try to start with simple, and then we'll move on. Anyway, okay. So last but not least, and perhaps a juicy bit of conversation to have, which is package.json workflows. I'd like to just introduce the topic, but then open the floor, and we have some demos that we'd like to show if you guys don't mind seeing. So Mark's been working on Cordova CLI, which maybe many of you are aware, for a while, and he sort of some of the time has been trying to come up with a way to simplify its interface to be more usable programmatically. It's surprisingly already relatively usable. It's just sort of you need to know a few tips and tricks, which Mark knows because he digs in there, but not everybody does. And I think he spent a little bit of time trying to clean it up internally, some of which was done by actually just modifying Cordova lib, fully compatible. But eventually he just created a separate repo that's relatively simple, and we'll share the links, that just provides a slightly better interface on top of Cordova lib. And maybe we will be able to merge that in eventually, but anybody can have, we can have that debate. So there's a repo sitting in Mark's GitHub of just another Cordova lib type interface reimagined, let's say, if it was even easier to use. Specifics aren't that important, but what it's meant is now we've been able to come up with like many different workflows that just use the node interface directly as opposed to Cordova CLI as a tool. And so we have demos of using, building a separate CLI, really simple, very few lines. It's like cool project we're working on, I'll describe in a sec. And then we have like gulp-based workflows, and then we have like node scripts that are fairly independent. And so anyway, I'll show that off. But I guess the high-level summary is a lot of the discussions so far about package.json have focused on how do we change the existing Cordova CLI and the existing Cordova project structure to add a package.json. And I think it's gotten quite complicated because the mixing of using NPM along with the Cordova CLI has not been so trivial. Right now we're moving towards storing everything in NPM, fetching everything from NPM, but still using the Cordova CLI and still having a Cordova project structure. And I think this has been good. This has been relatively painless, and it's going to give us a bunch of good wins. As soon as we want to add a package.json and a node modules, based on the experiments that we've done, we've just gotten rid of CLI entirely. We've just gone straight to Cordova lib and straight to gulp, or node scripts if you don't want to use gulp, like it's just. Anyway, that's the high-level intro. Maybe I'll show a quick demo, and then we'll get other people conversing.
So I have a comment, or I can wait until we're done.
No, go ahead. I'll start the screen.
So this
experimented with, by the way, so he was the first one to do all this stuff.
This topic came up here in IBM on if we are going to build something that uses the Cordova CLI, should we use the Cordova CLI or should we use Cordova-lib? And I'm kind of the one of the people that made the decision of not using Cordova-lib, and I don't have any against of Cordova-lib, but I see two problems from my, if I put my hat as the IBM architect, right, is the API is not documented, it's not fully documented, and it changes a lot. So if we want to have Cordova-lib, as an API, programmatically API, we need to do at least those two things: make it stable, same versioning, and document it purely so people can build on top of it. So for now, I'm building on top of Cordova CLI because that's the one that's not changing. You always can do Cordova platform add, Cordova plugin add, and those functions from the exec. And the last comment is, if we're going to enhance Cordova-lib, then it would be cool if we can enhance it with, better, streams or more modern APIs or promises or those type of things that it's nice to build something on top of it. But I think the demos and the things that we build on top of it would decide what should be the right API. But minimum is documentation, stability, so people can build on top of it.
So
that's my long rant.
I agree with all of that. There's a long way to go, and that's what Mark was sort of trying to focus on. Cordova lib, almost like at least half of it is specific to Cordova CLI. Everything to do with the opinionated directory structure, to the way we do fetching, to a whole bunch of stuff, was just originally copied over. In CCA, in the Chrome apps for mobile, we struggled with the same question of Cordova lib versus CLI, and we ended up actually using both. And the reason is we want to be CLI compatible with CLI. And the parsing actually still happens in CLI. So we actually, if you type something and we don't actually want to handle it ourselves, like a special command that's like an extension, we will forward it over to Cordova CLI. But some things that we do in our tool will use the Cordova lib directly. So I think if you want to be CLI compatible, you'll have to depend on the CLI. But if you just want to use Cordova plugins and Cordova platforms, I don't think you should have to use Cordova CLI. I think you should use Cordova lib directly.
I agree.
To the best of my knowledge, just to clarify, I don't think the publicly exported modules for Cordova lib have ever had breaking changes. I think everyone who's touched it has been careful not to change the API.
Yeah. Just by coincidence, but not by intention or API.
For Visual Studio, we also depend on Cordova lib's API being consistent and maintained.
Cool. Maybe keep going with the demo, and then we can discuss it.
All right. Can everybody see my screen if you pinned it?
No.
Yep.
It just looks black right now because it's a terminal.
We're waiting for him to share.
Yeah, I see it. Just touch on Michael box.
Oh yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. All the photos are? Yeah. Unless anybody says pause, I'm going to start now. Okay. So the part of the motivation for why we started all of this was, I don't want to like diverge the conversation, but we've been playing with service workers, and if we could build Cordova apps using a service worker, like web application, and just wrap it in Cordova. And Ian here and Max have been working on a plugin to let you do that and that sort of thing. But at some point we said, okay, we need tooling to take these normal, typical, vanilla web applications and wrap them into a Cordova app automatically. So anyway, so this is a regular. This has no Cordova whatsoever right now. Okay, it has a package JSON, a gulp file. Inside my app, I have a web app manifest. So if I open that up, so my web app manifest has like a name and a start URL and a few other things. And I can open this up in a browser. And so now, as an app developer, okay, this runs in Chrome and it does some things. And now I want to run it. I want to wrap it and add it, or run it on iOS. Okay. So what would I have to do right now with Cordova CLI? I would have to create a project sort of in a different directory structure on the side and learn about the import syntax to import this over on the side. But even if I did that, I have this gulp file that prepares my assets and maybe does minification and concatenation and that sort of thing. So if I include the whole thing, I actually package up a bunch of things that I don't want. So I actually want like a distribution, like the output of this build, and that's actually what I want to build. And I think people struggle with this quite a bit right now with the existing Cordova CLI tooling. So our vision instead was, if I open the gulp file, we created a separate node package that's built on top of Mark's thing. Anyway, we'll send out links so everybody could dig deeper. I don't want to spend too much time. But here's a gulp task to create an iOS project. And that highlighting is really nasty. Okay, so it's a gulp task for creating an iOS. And what it does is it imports SW to CDB, that's service worker to Cordova. It's just on top of Cordova lib, like it's on the order of 100 lines. I'll show that later. And then you can create an iOS project telling it where you want, what you want the source to be, where you want the destination to go, where the platform comes from, and what plugins you want to install. And I installed earlier through NPM Cordova iOS and Cordova plugin device. Okay, so I'm passing it to this script. And then it will go call all of the Cordova lib and platform node scripts to actually create where I told it to create and import from where I told it to import and add the platform and plugin. A similar thing exists for building, lower. It's just a separate task which assumes you've already created, and then a separate run task which assumes you've already built. Okay, and then of course a single task that does them all in sequence. There's no opinionated directory structure that was created here for me. I had to specify every single time where to go find the project, where it was created. I specify which plugins to add. There's no like dependency management. But now I'm free to integrate this into my existing workflow, right? So I had all these other tasks here that created a distribution, minification, CSS, and that sort of thing. And then I create a new Cordova project telling it where to get all of those files. And so, you know, Mark's opinion of how to build his web app will be different than mine. Anyway, so if I gulp iOS, we'll just do what Cordova run iOS would normally do. Anyway, and then it runs my application. I guess it's kind of hard to show without sending out all the links and having everybody analyze it, a command line demo. But the emphasis here is I could add this to an existing web application by copying a few like gulp lines that I got from a recipe somewhere online, and then npm installing the platform and plugins that I want, and then configuring things however I want. I didn't really have to learn all that much. And so you're adding Cordova to your existing web project as opposed to creating a new Cordova project and managing it there and learning about all of our opinionated flow, if that makes sense.
Yep. I like it.
So everything is in node modules. There's no platforms directory, no plugins directory. I think it just makes more sense. If you're going to go package JSON, you need to go all the way package JSON.
Well, there is a platforms directory. You just called it build.
Yeah, okay. That's the output.
But you don't keep it in the source control.
Right.
And one other added benefit is that because it's all scripts, you don't need hooks anymore. So whenever you need something like a hook, you just write the hook inside your build file or gulp file or whatever it is, and you can do whatever magic you want to do yourself in the intuitive places. And basically, the API wrapper we added was more like an experimentation about how the API typically should look in this kind of setup. So it's an attempt to figure out what that API will be that we will later have to create and document and maintain.
Yeah, but it's still a work in progress and like really open to feedback. And Mark's actually doing an ApacheCon presentation about this topic.
Yeah, so it's pretty much, I'll present a similar demo app based in Gulp on ApacheCon, and I'll send out all the presentations.
I've got some feedback. I think the goal of allowing Cordova projects to be built in many ways is an excellent goal. But I mean, I would like to see it approached by defining a common project metadata first, rather than having code in a script that adds your plugins and platforms. Personally, I would rather see a well-defined metadata format that any tool could work with, and then any tool could pick that up and build with.
Well, defining metadata assumes that this thing is like defining a project is purely declarative, which is not true. You sometimes want to do some programmatic things inside the project. You want to define some metadata, then do some part of the things, and then instead of the hooks, you want to manually go and get into the guts of your project and modify something that Cordova still cannot do and will not be doing because it's something very specific to you, and then continue with building the project Cordova based. So
I'm not suggesting that you can't have scripts. I mean, the question is what should be in the metadata. Like, for example, the list of platforms and the list of plugins. And in fact, in this demo, you're picking up some metadata. You're picking up some metadata from this manifest file that exists with the website to begin with, right?
Yeah. So that was it. I'm sorry to have diverged the thing. It was just happened to be the tool we're working on. So in our service worker to Cordova thing, we're choosing to assume to use web app manifests. But I could have, from within the gulp script, programmatically specified all that metadata. Or I could have still used a config XML file, which is what Mark's version, he has an equivalent type thing that he's been experimenting with. He continues to use a project config XML.
But basically, yes, I agree. Like, you need to define the metadata, and that the definition of this metadata is part of the API.
Right.
Right. So I mean, I would have preferred to see that your tool that you're demonstrating here took this manifest metadata, converted it into a well-defined Cordova metadata format, and then that the build step then took the information from that well-defined metadata. One reason being, if multiple people work on a particular project, they don't necessarily all want to use the same tools to build. But if the thing that's really the project definition, the platforms, the plugins, some of this other metadata that's currently in config.xml, if that's all in a well-defined place, then any tool can pick that up and build it, and other tools can gather that information somehow from other places and create the metadata.
Yeah, and I think that is possible. So it's worth emphasizing for those that didn't catch that the actual metadata format is specified this time at the programmatic API boundary. So when you call in to create a new project, you say, you want it to import this and export here, and also these are the config parameters that you want to create it with. And so that one way is to have a config XML parser and get that information, which we already have implementations for from within Cordova lib, so we could provide that as a helper. Another way is just to specify it manually using whichever format you want. Anyway,
I just think a common format that everyone used as I call it the project definition. I mean, that's just the way I think about it.
There is value to that. We don't necessarily want everybody to come into Jira and say, oh, I wrote my entire build system from scratch, and I don't have a way to share my system configuration or that sort of thing. So we'll probably provide opinionated XML parser that turns an XML file into this scripted metadata format, or do that by default, or whatever. But it shouldn't be.
Well, not at 5. We decide to put it just a JSON object, right? It could be programmatically, or it could be just sitting in a JSON object in package.json, right? There's a Cordova property in package.json, which just happens to have a JSON stuff in there.
The JSON, I don't know if it was quite enough. I think right now what it is it the config parser? Is that what it's called?
So there are for now there are two big lumps of configuration information. There is the config XML, which is partially abstracted by config parser already in Cordova lib, and it would be really nice to have this abstraction go all the way so that all the XML bits are abstracted away. And the other lump of information is a bunch of directory definitions, where the input comes from and the output goes, which was in this case defined in a gulp file. It would be really nice to see them merged. What really comprises this information is not really intuitive because, for example, people really think that the list of platforms is part of this information, but it's not really, because project definition doesn't really have to include the list of platforms. It's just like you're giving a flag which platform to compile for. But yes, like some of this information, which is not really specific to the Cordova project itself, but more to your specific way of building the Cordova project in this particular application, you'll probably see it in like kind of something like a JSON object or something similar, which can be programmatically modified depending on your build type and stuff like this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not suggesting exactly what should be in the project definition. Obviously, we can discuss what's appropriate as part of the, you know, the thing that's common among all builders, etc. But yeah, just a thought.
Important to say that this project definition, then from what I've saw in the experiments, is very small. It's like order of 8 or 9 parameters, like a bunch of directories and a couple of names, and that's about it. And the config XML that we currently already have.
I'd like to just wind it back to the point, which is a lot of people have been saying, you know, let's just add a package JSON to existing Cordova projects. And I think that's kind of scary. And I think that it's going to get really hairy in the details. Because if you npm install a plugin or platform, then it ends up in a node module just sitting there. You still then have to do some post-install hook to then add it to your project, and it becomes unwieldy and unnecessary. You know, in the native script npm transition in that bug post, they basically use their own CLI to do dependency management, which is what we have with Cordova CLI, and that's what we're doing. And so there's no way we're going to deprecate the Cordova CLI workflow. I think that project is very valuable and very useful. If all you want to do is say, I don't know what I'm building. I don't already have an app. I just want to get started building for Android and iOS. That workflow still probably makes a lot of sense. So the emphasis really, I think, was that now that we've moved everything to NPM and everything has a package JSON, this new workflow has opened up without us even focusing on it. You know, we just reverse engineered it and built it, and it's working for us already. We can make it cleaner. But I just wanted to clarify that. Like, if we're going to go package JSON,
I think both workflows are obviously very valuable, and the CLI is going to stick around for sure, just like you said. But adding a package JSON to the CLI could still work. You could still just change the fetch logic, so you'd still have to do a Cordova plugin add, whatever, and the fetch logic would initially check, you know, your node modules folder, something like that. I'd have to figure out all the details, but I would think there could be a way where you could take this package JSON and potentially work with both workflows if you wanted to.
Well,
you could use it in a CLI workflow, and you could use it in a...
You can't just tell the CLI to install a plugin from like a directory. So potentially, yes. Like you could even just do that manually in your own, setup.
You could use Link or something, yeah.
So yeah. For example, for me, I'm kind of addicted to Makefiles, so I've been using Makefiles in my Cordova projects, and there I can modify where I install from. But I mean, whatever build system you're using, it is already flexible enough for you to use the CLI to add from pretty much anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't even need to modify internal Cordova logic.
I wanted to provide a little bit of I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut off your.
I'm done. Go ahead.
Okay, I thought you were done. Sorry. The audio and video are a little bit out of sync, so sometimes like trying to jump into a natural pause.
No worries.
I just wanted to provide a little bit of validating feedback, because this isn't what you just demonstrated, Michael, is not exactly like the normal workflow that I would use, because normally I'm working on dedicated Cordova projects that are, they're meant to be hybrid applications. That's the primary, development use case, is it's a hybrid application. However, I did provide support to some guys that were doing a project for Intel a while ago, and their use case was different. They wanted to have a website, and they just wanted to really use Cordova as a way to be able to deploy that website, onto hybrid apps with some very minor modifications to take advantage of some very minor Cordova features. So, I think for people who have primarily a web application development workflow, and they primarily want to integrate, like, being able to build Cordova applications as build artifacts to sort of repurpose an existing project to a new target, I mean, this they would have loved this. This is what they wanted to do exactly, and we couldn't really hook them up with a way to do that. And this was like a year and a half ago, so lots of stuff has changed. But I just want to provide some feedback that I think there's definitely some users that would really like this capability to be available to them, and it makes a lot of sense for. So.
Yeah, I also want to just say that this is part of the benefit of maintaining some flexibility. We shouldn't try to decide what everyone's workflow is going to be, but demonstrating that we can support multiple, I think, is super powerful, especially in a node world where things are changing frequently. Build systems are changing frequently, from grunt to gulp. So being able to just support whatever comes along is great.
But it seems like overall we're kind of all agreeing on this, and I think a very important point Carlos mentioned earlier is that now for this to be more viable for people, we should perhaps focus on just having a more formal documentation of the API of Cordova Lib that people can use it outside. Because effectively we're kind of doing, for example, what GCC did, making their compilation technology available as a library, where basically naturally we've transitioned from Cordova being only a CLI that you use to now having a library that you can use in your other tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's become modular enough that we can now allow for these kinds of workflows. So it's a good idea perhaps then to focus on documenting what the API we provide is and making sure it's stable, things like that. So I guess, should we have an action item for this? Do you guys think we should have an action item for this in the end, or
I don't know
that it's necessary. We're just all in agreement on?
Well, I think there's a natural action item that is Mark's findings on Cordova Lib, things that are hard coded into the code, make them programmatically flexible, so they can be exposed as APIs. For example, if I want to change the directory structure to, instead of calling platforms, I want to call them plat. Instead of calling plugins, I want to call them extensions, right? Be able to programmatically have that work and not by convention. I know that we did it by convention because it was easy, right? But if we have a programmatically API that is public, even if we just stash it into a metadata file, but we don't expose that metadata file. We don't expose that .config.json, please. We expose the programmatically API and then build on top of it. The Cordova CLI happens to be one implementation that happens to use a JSON file, but you can build a ground gulp, make whatever thing you want as long as you use Node, require Cordova Lib, and just go with it. But there's a few tiny things I think Mark pointed out that are hard-coded today, so at least fix those and then go with something public. Make what we have today public, like Andrew said, we haven't broken it. So let's have it public, let's have it unit tested, that if somebody changes something, we can find out that the public API is broken fast. So that's my 2 minutes. Right?
Yeah, Michael, you had a thought? Yeah, Michael, you had a thought going.
So I think moving forward, it's kind of complicated how to do it properly. In my opinion, in the ideal world, Cordova CLI should do more. Like right now, it really shims over to Cordova Lib almost all of its functionality. And so because of that, Cordova Lib is, like you said, hard-coded for certain things. And it's possible to override, but it's not really natural. I think there's a subset of Cordova Lib, which is Cordova Lib core, you might say. And what it's responsible for is it knows how to, like, given a platform, install it, and given a plugin, install it, and given a target, run it, that sort of thing.
Right.
All of these generic things. And then all of the opinionated pieces and how to fetch from where and put it where and that sort of thing should be in theory, Cordova CLI, but probably needs to remain in Cordova Lib compatibility reasons. So I think it might be nice to rip out a Cordova Lib core, which is consumed by these downstreams, just to make it easier. I mean, we know how to get around it. We've proven that it's possible, but it does mean you have a bigger dependency, and it also means it's a bit harder to figure out.
Yeah, we should definitely split it into smaller modules.
And there are room for helpers too. Like there's a, like search paths. Anyway, there's a lot we could do.
And Steve, clarification. You said a lot of smaller modules, meaning no modules, not npm packages, because that's another conversation that gets tricky. Like we don't want to have 300 npm packages internal Cordova lib, right? We may want to have a lot of node modules, a lot of node JavaScript files that just do one thing, very tiny, very core.
Yeah, I agree. Node modules, and the ones that make sense to publish as npm modules, you can publish. But the ones, they don't all need to be published. That wouldn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, we may end up with Cordova-lib core and Cordova-lib API. I don't know, but it needs to be something public. I feel like I would not use it me as downstream if it's not documented. I know that is have potential for somebody to change it or decide they want to change it and then build on top of it. And again, nothing is forever. As long as you do a API version, same version incorrectly, right? The first digit, change it. That's okay. We change the API, make it better.
So, Michael, did you mean specifically splitting Cordova lib into several different repositories, or?
Well, I don't know that I have a concrete plan. I think we tried to just clean it up from within.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot of anyway. It occupies time, right?
Yeah.
A lot of work. So I don't know whether we rip it out into a separate repo. Perhaps we just have a subdirectory and start breaking it out in place so that it continues to be compatible throughout the process. I don't know. I don't think we have a clear transition plan. This is one reason.
Okay.
So
should we start a discuss thread? Oh, sorry, Nikhil.
Yeah, there was one case in point. I think I was reviewing npm's architecture, npm, the command line CLI itself. Interestingly, they have node modules. Of course, they would use node modules and npm itself for everything. And they had argument parsing as a separate module. And in fact, Tim had a PR recently, which he was trying to use npm's command line parsing for our command line parsing, because it really takes care of Git and all sorts of protocols and all sorts of things. It supports adding from all sorts of sources. So there might be some sort of inspiration we can draw from some of that on how to separate it out into components which could be individually used depending on your workflow and depending on the tool you choose.
Fair enough. Yeah, so should we start a discuss thread on this, on the design of this? What do you guys think should be the next actionable steps forward?
I guess I would like to see if anyone's interested in actually doing anything here, and then maybe form a smaller subgroup of those who are willing to make code changes to formalize a plan.
Okay.
Yeah, we're required some investigation.
And I guess I'll start with sending out all the links to all the demos from the presentation.
Yeah, that would be a good first step, having those links and reviewing.
I think whoever is actually signing up to make changes here's vote's going to weigh a lot more than anyone else's. And I'm talking as someone whose vote's not going to weigh much.
Yeah, I like to see the demos and what Mark did, and then maybe do a POC on what we have to do with Cordova Lib to see what will feel like a good API and not boil the whole ocean, right? But enough.
I would sign up for this committee, but see who else is in it.
I'll send it out next week.
Huh? We don't have committees here.
Yeah, I guess people just get together, design stuff, and make a PR.
Well, that's it for the agenda items.
Okay, cool. So, does anyone else have anything? Yeah.
That was a good long meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we still have 20 minutes.
Dialing in. Looking forward to seeing some of you at ApacheCon.
Oh, here's a question. Just for show of hands, who? Let's see, I have a guitar. Who in this hangout right now? Who here is not a committer? Kind of a show of hands.
I am not a committer.
I don't know. Oh, Leo. Oh yeah, because we can't see you. Sorry.
We got some voting to do.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Just yeah. Oh, and Edna.
Yeah, and Karen and James here at IBM as well.
Cool. All right, yeah. Just to kind of see who's in what votes. All right, sweet.
You asked who was not a committer?
Who was not a committer? Yeah. So just a mix of who.
The guys in IBM are committers.
Okay.
Good rub it in.
Also, Edna, you guys are committers?
No, we are not. Only Marcel.
Oh,
Marcel, sorry.
okay.
Yeah. Send in your nomination.
There's a few IBMers that are committed. Marcel,
I
Stacy.
nominated Carlos.
Cool.
There is a list on Apache's public pages of every project and all their committers. So if you actually just are curious who's a committer, it is on that list.
And by company, we have a wiki.
Oh no.
Per company. So if you want to add your name as your wiki committer,
I would like to see the list of all the new Microsoft committers because I've had trouble keeping up. But we should probably do that somewhere else.
Just as guidance here, if you're interested in making that step, generally what works well is sending a direct email to whoever is a committer and has been working with you.
Yeah, sorry for all the nag mails.
Anyone's from Microsoft, send me an email. I'll start a discussion.
Cool.
Awesome.
This is the first Hangout I've been on, and I don't remember the last notes if it listed all the attendees and like what companies they are representing. I'm just kind of curious. It seems like Michael. I mean, I know a lot of the people that are on the call, but a lot of you I've never actually seen before.
Likewise.
But I've seen you on the mailing list.
Can we do a brief introduction round since we didn't do it at the begining?
Yeah, we got at the end. We did it at the end.
Sure.
Well, there's a who's page on the wiki.
Yeah, but here you get to like see.
Yeah, I think I tried to edit that one time.
The wiki is a joke. Just to be clear.
I'm Steve. Hello.
This is Steve. I'm Jesse, aka Purple Cabbage from Adobe. This is
Hey,
Shazan.
Who's next? I'm Dimitri from Microsoft. I'm supposed to be in the same room as Nikhil and Murat over there, who are going to introduce themselves shortly.
I guess we continue then. Like, I'm Murad.
I'm Nikhil.
I'm Tony from Intel.
And I'm Leo from Intel, working on the XDK.
I'm Andrew.
Michael.
Don.
Mark.
Don's our intern.
Nice.
Now we're going to introduce.
Now you know.
Yeah, and we're all here.
IBM.
Carlos, IBM.
Edna, IBM. I'm Karen, and IBM. And
Hello.
Is that Marcel?
no, Marcel was here earlier, but he had to leave.
Sorry, I didn't catch the name.
Oh, James.
James. Gotcha.
Okay.
So we'll edit that so that's at the beginning.
All right. Sweet.
This broadcast live, it might be difficult.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys. This is my first Hangout too, so
Right.
nice to meet you all.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
See ya.